Just on the lease rates, you're showing some downward trends there. You spoke a little bit about the oversupply, the high number of conversions that we saw last year. What's your outlook going forward? Do we see the number of conversions going down? Do you see these lease rates stabilizing? Do you think there's room for them to go up again to the levels that we've seen in the past? What's your feelings of over the coming years for these rates?
I think okay, so yeah, we need to kind of just delve into the types here. And again, the most contested ones are obviously the A321 and the 737-800. Now, the A321, I know from experience that because it was initially quite an expensive conversion in terms of the combination of the feedstock, the conversion, the mods, etc., you need to justify that or amortize that with quite a peaky lease rate. So you can see there initially in the program, the lease rates are actually above 250K a month, which is, quite a lot basically for one of, but you needed to do that to justify the high investment cost or, amortize it in the first place. You can see then it kind of slips away quite a lot over the period as the market sort of settles down and it becomes more difficult to justify such a high lease rate. And then, of course, with the recent, increase in costs, as I've already mentioned, like labor costs, inflation, etc., and of course the feedstock price going back up on the PAX aircraft, you've got to sort of amortize that, with a better lease rate. But the problem is you've got the oversupply going on in the sector overall, with all these 800s being converted. I think that's kind of dragging lease rates of other aircraft down with it. But I think there's, the cargo market long term, if you look at it in terms of trends, is a resilient industry. So I can easily see, the lease rates of the A3 settling and perhaps even increasing again long term. 737-800 is a more difficult one to kind of, because, there's no question about it. I know there in this analysis, we've got a 21-year-old aircraft, but I think you've got to look at it in terms of the general lease rate, in terms of, the magnitude. Forget the, the actual vintage for one. What you've got to think of is at the end of the day, when these were first being converted, 2017, 18, 19, that kind of period, they were definitely kind of like a, 200,000-ish lease rate a month aeroplane. Things then settled down shortly after COVID to more like 180 to 195, that kind of area. We've even seen lease rates now, they've definitely settled to lower levels. We've seen as low as even below 160,000. I'm not saying that's typical of a 737-800, but if they continue to over convert the aircraft in terms of numbers and it becomes challenging to place the aircraft, then you might see the lease rate slip even lower. But it's definitely a comfortably sub $200,000 aeroplane now for a lease rate. And as I say, on one or two occasions, we've seen lease rates as low as 160, maybe even less.
When the classic, even 140, 150 in
exactly
cases,
I think that's a little bit extremist at the moment. But nevertheless, if we've heard of isolated examples where it can be as low as that, it sets a barometer, doesn't it? So it needs to be sort of closely monitored. So I think in terms of the lease rates recovering again on the 800, I think they could take a bit longer because you've got so many more aircraft than, say, the A321. The 757 is always kind of teetered at around, you can see that that's a 200,000 level mark, but I think it's sneaking in underneath now. And will continue to kind of decline because, don't get me wrong, it's been a great aircraft. I can't think of many people that don't like a 757, everybody loves a 757, but, it's an aging program now. There's more efficient narrow bodies, I beg your pardon, that can do most of the 757's work. So directionally, I just see the 757 line continuing to decline. And much the same for the 400. I mean, not that long ago, as our data shows there, it was 140K aircraft, basically. Kind of through the COVID period, it was more like 100, if I remember rightly. I remember seeing contracted anything from about 111 to 127. That's a fairly relatively young build 737-400, but I think you'll probably find soon that the lease rates on those will probably creep even below 100K, if not even less, 90K, something like that. So again, a generally decreasing, sort of line for the 737-400 freighter there.